Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's 3 minutes after 11. It's a good job this didn't drop an hour ago. One senior political journalist has just tweeted, leading number 10 figure tells me that there's no plan for an election in September and that the focus is on leaving on October the 31st without a general election. I'm informed this has been made extremely clear to both Downing Street spads and officials. You will, of course, remember Theresa May ruled out a snap election just before calling one almost as often as she uttered those dread words, strong and stable. God, how time flies. Do you remember that? Do you remember when strong and stable was Theresa May's catchphrase? Shortly after voting for David Cameron would have avoided chaos with Ed Miliband. Some days I wonder why we bother. 4 minutes after 11. But today is not one of those days. I genuinely want to know what you think about this, because I don't know what to think about it, and I don't know whether what I think even matters. It has been suggested, I think quite rightly, James Cleverly, who we had a delightful exchange with earlier this week on the programme, made a very, very clever and, I think, effective point on Twitter earlier this week, yesterday in fact, when he found an old tweet of Jeremy Corbyn's talking about ethnic diversity and representation and pointed out that Boris Johnson's first cabinet is, I suspect, the most ethnically diverse that we've ever seen. And this is, it has been suggested, a calls for celebration, particularly among ethnic minorities and those of us who believe in equality and diversity. The problem is, of course, that some of the faces in the cabinet, albeit that they're not white, are not necessarily faces that you would associate with a profound belief in equality. Priti Patel, for example, is slightly to the right of Genghis Khan, according to many of her past pronouncements. She is of a type with Dominic Raab. Dominic Raab himself, the son of refugees. Although whether or not either of them believe that this country should offer a welcome to refugees today, similar to the one that was offered to their forebears yesterday, is something I'd love to ask them if I got the chance. So the suggestion is it doesn't matter what their politics is, their ethnicity is something to celebrate. Seeing it at the top table of the British establishment, British politics, is a cause for celebration. I'm going to do this off the top of my head because I haven't got the list in front of me. Kwasi Kwarteng, okay, he's an old Etonian, but he's black. James Cleverly, mixed race. Priti Patel, I think Ugandan Asian, probably came here because her family were fleeing Idi Amin, I imagine. Sajid Javid, apparently he's the son of a bus driver. That's 4. I think there's more. So just you tell me. I had a bit of a crash course in race relations when Barack Obama became president of the United States of America. I was slightly taken aback. I'd forgotten about this until this morning, actually, when I decided that we'd probably talk about this topic together today. And the number of people of colour, women of colour in particular, who rang me the morning after Barack Obama became president of the United States was a real education for me, because they were talking about, and you might snigger now because it's a long time ago and it seems a bit blinking obvious with 2020 hindsight, but as a slightly less middle-aged back then, but still very much a white fella, I hadn't really thought about it. I hadn't really looked at it through anybody else's eyes. And a lot of mums rang me to tell me that as the mother of a black boy in particular, this sent a message of almost incomprehensible beauty to her son. That message being, the phrase I use a lot to describe how I was raised by my dad and mum, is you are as good as anyone else. You know, you can do anything. There shouldn't be any doors through which you cannot pass by dint of your birth. Now, class is the way most of us experience that, or gender, of course, the glass ceiling as well. But for those of us who are white, it's sometimes a little bit hard to appreciate how firmly closed some doors seem to be by dint of your colour. And that's why I cautiously, while checking my white privilege at the door, I cautiously celebrate the presence in the cabinet of people whose politics I find close to repellent, but whose ethnicity is now represented at the top table of the British establishment. 0345 6060973 is the number you need to tell me whether you agree or not. And there's been quite an enjoyable disagreement between prominent journalists of colour from the United Kingdom. And they're fairly well divided. So Nihal, who you might be familiar with as a DJ and radio presenter, he's of Sri Lankan heritage, and he has made the point that I just made, which is essentially the politics don't matter. This is a cause for celebration. This tells brown children, black children, mixed race children up and down the country that you too can aspire to govern, you know? In the same way that we should all be proud of having had 2 female prime ministers, even if you are a dyed-in-the-wool Labour supporter. It's progressive, it's good, it's diverse, I think. But just for the avoidance of doubt, I'm not a woman either. So where do we stand on this one? And I think in the first instance, your qualifications to contribute are going to have to be built upon not being a middle-aged white man like me. 0345 6060973. My holy grail would be a caller of colour who pretty much despises that mindset of somebody like Priti Patel. You know, the British workers are among the idlest in the world. That whole attitude that the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary both put their names to in 2012. But who celebrates genuinely and full-throatedly the presence of an Asian woman at the cabinet table, even if it is one who got fired by the last Prime Minister for lying about opening secret back channels with the Israeli government. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Can you celebrate? Because, again, you know, we all sometimes come across as being achingly progressive, but you've got to admit when you don't know stuff, and I don't know on this one. I'd love to know what you think, because I'm not quite sure what I think. I think it's a good thing, even if the politics are obnoxious. But what would you feel if Donald Trump had a number of key advisors from ethnic minorities while simultaneously espousing avowedly racist tropes and calling for people to be sent back where they came from, even if they were born in America? Would that still be a cause for celebration? Because, you know, the parallels between Johnson and Trump are being drawn by many, many people. As I said yesterday, I think the most extreme comparisons are actually rather unfair to Boris Johnson, but I could turn out to be wrong about that. He is not on anything like the same page as Donald Trump when it comes to race relations, but he has spoken about the watermelon smiles and pickaninnies, and we know he's spoken about letterboxes and bank robbers, although that's not in and of itself an ethnic slur. It's a slur upon women who follow a certain religion, follow Islam, and think that they're somehow compelled religiously to cover their faces. The watermelon smile stuff and calling Barack Obama part Kenyan with a hatred of Britain, that's pretty close to the wire. The Piccaninny stuff is way over the wire, but it's nowhere near send her home, send her home, send her back, send her back. So is it good news for the ethnic minorities of the United Kingdom, even if you find the politics of Priti Patel and Sajid Javid and James Cleverly and Kwasi Kwarteng, even if you find, because Kwarteng's on that flipping book as well, you know, Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, Dominic Raab, Priti Patel, and a guy called Chris Skidmore. Those are the 5 authors of that book, Britannia Unchained. Does it matter that they are extremely right-wing politicians if you, as someone who believes in liberalism and equality, can point to them as proof that in this country you can rise to the top regardless of your ethnicity? I think I've made the question clear. I'll stop wanging on now and invite you to contribute. Jill is in Thatcham. Jill, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James.
Hello.
First time calling your show. I'm very nervous.
Don't be. It's only me. It's only me.
So, I mean, I was just saying to your lady that I'm a black woman.
Yes.
And yes, it is nice to see diversity. It does make you feel that you can achieve as well. But actually, I think we need to look above that, and I think we need to look at their policies and how they think. I mean, just because there's a black person in the cabinet, it doesn't mean that they've had the same experiences of the ordinary black person on the street. And the fact that most of them...
Doesn't mean they haven't. I know he was a vice chairman of Chase Manhattan before he was 30, but Sajid Javid did grow up the son of a bus driver.
Yeah, that's true, and there will be exceptions.
And he
But I
would have
just
been
think-
a victim of racism. He would have been spat at. I can tell you for a fact, well, I can't tell you for a fact, but I went to a school a bit like Eton, albeit a Catholic version, and black kids at my school were roundly abused in terms that would now be unavowedly racist. So I presume Kwasi Kwarteng was as well. What sort of experiences are you thinking they might not have had?
Well, I just think that they probably, as soon as they've all been to or most of them have had some sort of private education, that they probably all have the same sort of mind thought. So to me, there's not that much diversity. Yes,
Well, only
there's
9% of the
colour.
country are privately educated, so that makes the white ones just as unrepresentative as the black ones or the brown ones, doesn't it?
I take your point. I take your point, but I still think that you have to look above the diversity and look at their policies and how they think, like you were just saying about Priti Patel and her mindset. I just don't think.
Well, you're trying to forgive me, Jill, but you are trying to do a Boris Johnson here. I think you're trying to have your
I
cake.
am.
You're trying to have your cake and eat it because you're saying yes, it does matter, but it shouldn't or it doesn't. So here is Priti Patel, a fairly vile politician for many people who believe in the sort of fundamental decency, the welfare state, equality, NHS being free according to clinical need, people who don't like the death penalty. She is almost like a tribute act to 1950s Big C conservatism, but she's also Asian. So if to be a little bit facile, how much of her toxic politics can you personally cancel out because of her ethnicity? In terms of applauding, well, I want to know. I want you to do the sums.
I wouldn't.
Not at all.
I wouldn't. No, so hang on a minute. I'm getting confused. I wouldn't take her. I would put her ethnicity on the back burner.
That's what I thought. So it's
and
not
look at her
inspirational to you.
policies.
It's not in any way inspirational to you to see a fellow person of colour in the cabinet if you disagree with them passionately about politics.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's really interesting that 11:15 is the time, and by all means, pick up on anything Jill has just said. But you must pick up on what I say. Gary points out, politics aside, it's progress, much like when Sadiq Khan became our mayor. An awful lot of, the nastiest stuff we ever get into the studio is about Sadiq Khan, and it seems odd to me that people who cheer Boris Johnson are going to be and send me really vile abuse when Sadiq Khan is in the studio, or send him really vile abuse via me. That's quite weird. That's almost a fascinating facet of racism. Well, I don't mean that one. That one's all right. No, I don't like that one. It's got nothing to do with ethnicity. That's just left-wing versus right-wing. Because if you despise Sadiq Khan because he's a Muslim, theoretically you should despise Sajid Javid as well. I'm not saying I want people to do that. It's two wrongs don't make a right, but I'm just pointing out a degree of inconsistency. And again, I don't think I can speculate about this as a white fella. How does Kwasi Kwarteng process the fact that his fellow Old Etonian and now Prime Minister describes pickaninnies with watermelon smiles when he writes about African people? I don't know that. I suspect it's got something to do with class, does it? If you're a certain type of conservative, and I think it would be despicable to portray all conservatives as in any way racist or bigoted, but a certain type of conservative who is. I've just been told that the abuse that came into the studio last Friday when I was off and David Lammy was standing in for me was even worse, even more vicious and vile than the stuff that routinely ends up in my inbox when Sadiq Khan is here. And those people would see themselves as right-wing, and conservatism with a big C is traditionally a right-wing thing. So I don't think there's any controversy in knitting some elements of those subsets together. How do you do that? Is it class? Do you think, well, of course they're a bit racist, but they don't mean black people like me. I went to Eton. It doesn't mean me. I've got watermelon smiles. I'm no pickaninny. I went to flipping school. Is that how you... I don't know how you do it. Saida Warsi is a fascinating case study in this because she was chairman of the Conservative Party, a predecessor, of course, of James Cleverly, who holds that role now, and has almost had an existential crisis subsequently as she unearthed, discovered, woke up to the depth of Islamophobia in the ranks of the Conservative Party membership. She speaks of little else now in public, and her shock and disgust at what she has discovered is matched only by her incredulity at the failure of her own party properly to investigate it, properly to punish people. It's fascinating, actually, to think that she would once have been an emblem of diversity. You could have pointed to, an Asian woman in the chair of the Conservative Party and said, this verily is a party for the 21st century. And she now dedicates an awful amount of her time to pointing out how much anti-Muslim hatred there is in the ranks of the party she used to be chairman of. Do you see why it is actually quite a tricky question, this? It's not immediately obvious. Of course you should celebrate having so many people of colour in the cabinet, if you're a person of colour or someone who, like me, isn't, but believes in equality, judging people by their actions, by the content of their hearts, not by the colour of their skin. I'll shut up now. I keep saying I'm not really qualified to contribute, and then I just wang on for 20 minutes. It must be so frustrating for you. I apologise. Christine's in Datchet. Christine, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hi,
I'm a woman of colour. I'm half Indian and half Irish, born and educated in India. And I've had terrible slurs against me. But I actually told your research, and you said I mustn't repeat it on.
No,
but, you know,
okay.
you just stand up for yourself and ignore it sometimes. But I think that this is a ploy by the Conservative government to show the Brexiteers, the British population, that the Brexit vote was not one on immigration. That they've got foreigners on their front benches. But the thing is, I mean, Priti Patel has no integrity about her to say the things that she's been saying. And she was sacked already once before. So, you know, I take pride and celebrate the fact that I see more ethnically sort of members on the front bench, yeah.
So you do. So this is what I'm trying to pin down.
It's not used in a very correct way. It's used to actually fool the public. It's not been one on. We love immigrants. Look, we've got all these ethnically diverse people on our front bench. That's what I think it is all about.
Well, you may be right. We'll never know. It may be sneaky. They may be I mean, I don't know that I'd agree with you yet, but the appointments of Raab and Patel seem to me of a piece, neither of which are informed by their ethnicity. But you're perfectly entitled to see things differently. What would if the Home Secretary was a white woman, you would feel a different emotional response to that appointment, would you?
No. As long as you had no. I mean, you know, the best person wins and has good policies.
No, but in terms of locked doors,
it's an important position.
Yeah, I'm not framing my question right. I think it's my fault. This
No, it's not.
It is. It's a problem with lefties. We're all so nice. Hang on, let me try again because I'm not going to tell you that I don't believe you, but surely as a woman of colour, to see another woman of colour as Home Secretary contains an emotional message. Before you start looking at her politics or her past, it contains an emotional, personal message to you, which is, look, this door is no longer locked. And it was when you were a young woman, I think.
It was in India, because we never ever had any discrimination. I lived amongst Muslims, Hindus, Catholics, Protestants, and...
you can't say there's no discrimination in a country that still has the caste system in place.
They had the caste system, but that's an ancient caste system.
I don't care how old it is. It's the definition of discrimination. But we're not in India now. We're in Datchet. When you look at the cabinet, you see either Saeed Owasi when she was chairman, or today you see Priti Patel. Are you telling me that her ethnicity is utterly irrelevant to you as a woman of colour?
Yes,
okay.
Because she has no integrity, that's why. But a woman of colour with integrity is something to celebrate, to be proud of, you know, like Indira Gandhi was. You know, she stood up to the British,
yes,
and she got what she wanted for her Indian people.
I get that. Listen, I've got enough on my plate. I'm picking British politics at the moment without casting a rule over the last 100 years of politics on the subcontinent. But I'm fascinated to hear that. Both of you, really, both of the female callers so far, you and Jill, kind of beginning with what sounded like a positive approach, but by the end of the conversation, it doesn't matter what colour she is or he is. Again, as a white bloke, I kind of don't feel my own position on this matters at all. If I don't even know what my position is. 26 minutes after 11. John's in Croydon. John, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning. I think that you're actually advocating reverse racism.
Okay.
If you're telling us that...
Did you hear the bit where I just said I don't know what my position is?
Yeah.
Well, that's good then, because you do,
Well,
so that's great.
No, that's not what I'm saying. You're saying that it's fine that Priti Patel is there. Never mind what her policies are, what her attitudes are.
I'm categorically not saying that, mate.
Well, you categorically are, because you're saying, isn't it wonderful? Don't you look at it and think, isn't it wonderful that?
No, I said as a white bloke, I don't know whether my position matters at all, and I don't actually know what it is. But if I was a person of colour, would I feel inspired by the arrival at the top table of the British establishment of so many people of colour? Because it teaches me and my children that we too can aspire to the highest offices in the land, and history suggests that previous generations never really felt that way.
I think that there are members of all ethnic minorities and white people as well who feel exactly that way, that they can achieve,
yes, but there hasn't been...
They're also telling them that there's not, you can't achieve because you're black, because you're Asian.
So just run me through all the black prime ministers that we've had.
The black prime ministers, no. Because, they
go on, mate, take your time.
For some... I'm sorry, what's that got to do with anything?
Well, where does a young black person get the idea that they could be prime minister from if there's never been one?
Well, it's a non-sequitur or whatever it is. Just because you see...
Secateurs are for doing the pruning in the garden, mate. If you're trying to do Latin, then it's sequitur, but let's let that pass. So, again, if the message is to that person there that you too can hold the highest offices in the land, and they say, well, no one my colour ever has, you're saying there's... Well, hang on, I'm not quite sure what you're saying. I don't think you really understand this conversation, do you?
Well, I think I do understand.
Right, well, then you tell me then. Tell me about that young lad there who wants to be Prime Minister and then says there's never actually been a black Prime Minister. Maybe that's not for the likes of me. You think that their view of the world won't change?
Then they have someone to turn around to them and say, don't be stupid, of course it's for the likes of you. Just because there hasn't been one doesn't mean that there isn't going to be.
Yes, and now there is one, so it's a much easier message to deliver. What do you mean by reverse racism? What do you mean by reverse racism?
Well, what I mean by reverse racism is an attitude which says don't matter what they think, if they're race, if they're black or Asian, then that's fine. The attitude towards...
So reverse racism is saying that it's fine to be black or brown?
No. It's fine to have any attitude you like if you're black.
It's fine to have any attitude you like if you're black. That's reverse racism.
Yes. You're advocating is that people who are, you should ignore what they think if they are of a certain ethnic minority.
Sorry, who said that? Me?
Well, that's what your attitude. But you seem to be advocating.
I'm afraid, John, I am going to refer you to the previous answer, which is I don't think you fully grasp what this conversation is actually about. But you take care. Have a great weekend. I'll light a candle for you in church on Sunday. James, you're conflating race with class. Name the last Prime Minister who wasn't educated at private schools. All right, mate. Theresa May, I think. Certainly Gordon Brown. John Major. Probably does it for now. I don't think Margaret Thatcher was privately educated either, was she? She was a grammar school girl. So, no, I don't think I am conflating race with class, but I think there is a class element in the conversation about race that we're having. When people like Kwasi Kwarteng or Priti Patel are reminded of some of the things that their Prime Minister, the man who's put them both in the cabinet, has said on matters ethnic, most obviously, I think, describing African people as pickaninnies with watermelon smiles. How do they process that? Answer, I presume, and I am completely speculating now, but I presume there's an element of, well, he doesn't mean us. He doesn't mean us. Well, who does he mean? Adrian is in Birmingham. Adrian, what would you like to say?
Thanks for having me on. It's good to talk to you again.
You're very welcome. Hang on. Can I read you something quickly before we crack on? This is from a prominent Corbyn supporting a kind of journalist, I suppose, technically, but I use the word advisedly. Someone from a minority group who chooses to serve in a far-right government is no longer a person of colour. They're a turncoat of colour. It's one thing to opt out of fighting oppression, quite another to legitimise it with your own skin. I find that ridiculous, but as a middle-aged white bloke, I wasn't expecting to feel an emotional reaction in this conversation like the one I just felt, and I'm not sure I've got any right to find that ridiculous. But I just wanted to put it out there because it articulates a position that we haven't had yet during this hour. Back to you, Adrian, in Birmingham.
Well, I'm not going to quite echo that point. I think that's quite strongly worded.
Yes.
But I kind of bring to the debate the idea that this argument is the point. So you've got a cabinet that's basically put in place to kind of perpetuate policies that are going to be really damaging to a lot of communities of colour and a lot of minority communities. I mean, for instance, Priti Patel is an advocate for the death penalty, for goodness sake. You can't really get more like neocon right-wing than that, but it puts a very kind of insidious pressure on people who are activists like myself against policies like that. When you stand up and say, look, for instance, the vast people of colour in this country are disproportionately imprisoned. If you start bringing death penalty into it, particularly for violent crimes, they're going to be disproportionately the victims of the death penalty as well. And they're not necessarily going to be a moniker of guilt or innocence. And they'll say, but hey, you're saying this policy is racist, but it can't be racist. The Home Secretary is a brown woman of Indian descent. And there's like, yeah, but that doesn't change the policy.
I mean, it's a complicated enough conversation as it is without...
Yeah.
And I understand why you brought this in, but just to nip that line of inquiry in the bud, that would apply to all justice policies.
Yeah, it would.
So it's not. I mean, the death penalty is a big one, so to speak.
No, it's just
so is there nothing here?
Nice, easy one to put out.
No,
there.
You're right. So for you as a black British man,
yeah,
you don't derive any. What's the word I want? Encouragement, comfort whatsoever from seeing black British faces around the cabinet table, which, when you were young, would have been close to unthinkable.
When I was young, yes, I definitely would have. But now I'm old enough to understand the process that got them to their position in the first place.
Go on.
I mean, you've got to ask why the person has been selected, not just because of their ethnicity, but because of their politics. They're there to fulfill a role, and if that role that they're there to fulfill kind of also involves kind of oppressing, communities of colour via policies, it kind of doesn't really matter. In fact, no, actually, I'll backtrack that. It does matter. It makes it worse.
It makes it worse?
Yeah. I mean,
so you'd rather not have any faces of colour around this cabinet table? You, as a black British man, would feel happier if there were no representation at all of your ethnicity around the cabinet table, because you disapprove so profoundly of the politics of that cabinet?
Yeah, basically.
Okay, that's interesting.
I mean, the kind of question is, would you prefer to be beaten up by someone who looks like you or someone who looks different to you? If you got the option, if you got it, is not to be beaten up in the first place, but it doesn't really matter who's doing the kicking. And it's, just to kind of, I don't want to make this into a history lesson, but this is a colonial thing. It's been going on for a really long time. The British Empire was very good at going into the community, picking the minority ethnic group that looked like the majority, but also had a little bit more power, shaking hands with them and said, "Do you want to hold the whip and the shackles? Okay, you do the."
Again, mate. I know it's quite a big reach, that, isn't it?
It is.
But it's how you feel, and you're being sincere. It makes me uncomfortable. Not as uncomfortable as the line about turncoats of colour, but you're pretty close to that position. You see them as facilitators, potentially facilitators of the oppression of, for want of a better phrase, quotes, their own people, end quotes.
Well, the oppression of everyone, but it just makes the people who are most advocate, like the strongest advocates for the strongest advocates for communities of colour usually are people of colour.
Yes.
And it makes it very, very difficult to argue a policy is directly against people like you based on the way you look and your ethnicity, when the person enacting that policy is also like you and shares your ethnicity. It's the same reason Ben Carson was given housing in the States. It gives a really, really good opportunity for people.
I don't think that's fair. I think you're right about Ben Carson, but I don't think that's why Boris Johnson has appointed these people.
Well, no, I don't think that's why he's appointed.
They're not tokens.
I think no. I don't know. I wouldn't.
No, I don't know
either. Count that out, but he's chosen them for their politics. Definitively, he's chosen them for their politics. The fact that their face fits is unfortunate for us, but very fortunate for him. And
I see what you mean, because then you have James Cleverly taking to social media, and I was impressed by this, and I'm wondering now whether I should have been, because I thought it was a really powerful point. Jeremy Corbyn talks a great game, and the Shadow Home Secretary, of course, is Diane Abbott, but here is a cabinet that is, I think, more multi-ethnic than any cabinet we've ever seen before, and as a lazy liberal white man, I just thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. And you're telling me, actually, you're saying not just it's not cool, you're saying it's the opposite. It's actually bad. It's actively bad.
It's the same as feminist representation, right? The Conservative Party has literally had two amazing female leaders who have been, great, have risen to the top of the party, right? That should be a thing that we put on a pedestal and go, wow, they've had two female prime ministers of the Conservative Party, until, of course, that you look at the record of those prime ministers and what they actually enacted and the things that they did with that position. The part of the problem of politics based around identity in general is that it's very hard to kind of find a line through, right? How much is representation important in terms of enacting policy? Because if you get the right person, the right kind of person to fulfill a role, and that role is fulfilled in a way that's damaging and deleterious to the entire country, does it really matter that the person's the right kind of person?
No, I'm really taking on board a lot of what you're saying. I'm struggling with some of it, actually, but in a good way. I'm struggling intellectually.
It's really pleasant, particularly because people like myself, and I will fully hold my hands up here, we've been banging on about representation for ages.
Yeah.
We've been doing this whole, we want the boardrooms to look like us, we want cabinet to look like us, and it's almost kind of gone, they've gone, look, this is what you wanted, this is diversity, right? I'm like, hang on, wait.
Exactly that. Oh, God, you've understood my own discombobulation better than I have myself. Let me try one more with you, which is, I know, as a white bloke who went to public school, I know my life would be a lot different, and, achieving stuff would have been a lot harder had I been black and or not privately educated, not having gone to public school. So to see somebody rise through the ranks of British society in a way that wouldn't have happened in previous generations would, at the beginning of this hour, I would just have seen that as an unalloyed good.
But this depends on how you look at it, right?
Yeah, I know it does now.
James?
Go on.
You are looking at it through the point of view that somebody manages to get into the room and they've managed to find a way to open the door, which is a beautiful way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But you kind of got to understand from my perspective, and a lot of people like me, it's who opened the door for them.
Yeah.
Now, if they've been selected by a system that hasn't really shifted its changed its politics in any way, shape or form, it's because they've effectively managed to do whatever they needed to do to get invited in. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they worked to get the door open. It just means that they've been selected to kind of join the party.
Man, do you know, this was the silver lining to me for the whole Boris Johnson cabinet. The silver lining was that it seemed to be a blow for diversity, and you've just pulled the rug from underneath me, Adrian. And you're far from alone. In fact, it's almost unanimous at the moment. Wayne, who is mixed race, it's clear they are just tokens, mate. Martina writes, sorry, they are tokens. This caller is spot on. Fantastic caller on LBC at the moment, says Gareth, presumably because of that perspicacity that you've just displayed. So, forgive me for sort of laying you, casting you in the role as spokesperson for everybody, everyone of colour. But am I part of the problem then when I say, well, that's good?
I hesitate to say yes, because far more problematic to me is other attitudes of other people, like, for instance, like your like previous caller before the break, who I'm still mildly reeling of. I've never heard somebody actually say, like, off of Twitter, whole reverse racism thing.
No, I know.
Impressive. But because that becomes very, very difficult.
Do you know what he meant? Because I'm still not sure what he meant. Did he mean he? Well, no, you tell me. What?
Well, what I've usually encountered it as is a person, usually a person of, in the UK at least, a white majority, taking any form of understanding any form of action or attitude that places people who don't look like them and who aren't like them in a favourable position in order to redress the balance.
Right.
As being
a discrimination against him, so he's the victim.
Yeah. So it's because a gentleman like himself doesn't see himself as winning. You had an amazing, he had an amazing saying on this. Like, he was born 3-0 up and convinced himself he scored a hat trick.
Yes.
And it's so common. It's so
well,
common.
You're telling me it is. I just missed it on this occasion because it wasn't, as you say, it wasn't something I'd actually seen in the wild before. I'd sort of encountered it on social media. So it is that sense of not realising that you have, or not acknowledging that you have any privilege, because your life doesn't really feel great, but really, really resenting the fact that what you have, you're now expected to share with people who would once have been firmly below you in the food chain. A little bit more love for Adrian, and you know how I feel about this. I get a little bit uncomfortable when callers garner too much praise because I'm massively insecure and full of myself. But in for a penny, in for a pound. Adrian is brilliant. Get him a slot on LBC. And this caller has intelligently covered all the bases and knocked the ball out of the park. You may as well start Mystery Hour 15 minutes early. I haven't actually decided yet whether or not we're going to have a Mystery Hour. Just send me a quick tweet now, if you yes or no. Let's just do, not a tweet, well, whatever. Just send me a yes or no via various means, okay? Tweets are free, aren't they? It won't cost you anything to send me a tweet. And then you can decide. There's a text number, 84850, but that'll cost you money. It's easy. What if you haven't got a Twitter account? Do you think possibly I'm overthinking this poll that I'm almost certain to ignore anyway? Yeah. Oh, well, finally, something we all agree on. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation, but I've got a feeling I'm even more confused and even perhaps discombobulated than I was at the beginning. I felt, and I've been clear from the beginning, that my personal ethnicity is a disqualifying factor from having a really powerful insight into this. I don't really know what it would be like to feel that doors were closed to me as a result of my skin colour. And further, you know, Mum and Dad sent me to the school they sent me to and raised me in a way that was designed very specifically to acknowledge the fact that you and me are as good as anyone else. Even if they wear a monocle and a top hat and live in a castle, we're as good as they are. It's slightly odd to learn, as I have done over only the last 3 or 4 years, actually, just how ingrained it is in English culture, particularly. And I do think this is where one of the distinctions between the 4 parts of the United Kingdom is pertinent. English culture is so deferential. The forelock tugging, you know, the cap doffing, the idea that that person must be clever, he must be entitled to rule because of the way he talks and the way he looks. It's actually incredible to see how little we've moved since the Victorian era, of course, in which most of us wouldn't even have had a vote. Oh, the good old days, yeah. Rotten boroughs and what have you. So I thought that simply seeing faces in the cabinet that you would not have seen 40 years ago was a good thing, an unalloyed good thing. The message it sends to young people of colour in this country is that you too can aspire to the highest offices in the land, in this case Home Secretary, in the way that I would say the same for the Shadow Home Secretary, who's also a woman of colour. I just would have thought that was just a good thing. Look, we've got a Home Secretary and a Shadow Home Secretary. They're both women of colour. It doesn't matter that one of them's very bad at maths and one of them's very bad at humanity. But I get it. I think I get it. And like you, I found Adrian's call absolutely riveting. 11:53 is the time. Michael is in Camden. Michael, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I think one useful starting point is to ask what actually is the point of diversity. And if the point of diversity is just about having
representation,
brown faces, well, if it's just about having black and brown faces in positions of power, then on that very superficial level, perhaps there is scope for taking encouragement from this.
Yes.
But actually, those of us who, I'm a black man.
Right.
So those of us who have a particular personal interest in these issues in the way that you've acknowledged that you do differently. It's not just about seeing people like us in those positions.
No.
The point of pushing for diversity is about instituting cultural change. Because the whole point of the equality movement, if I can put it in those broad terms, is about changing the power systems and structures and cultures which are predominantly determined by white middle class and upper class men to greater reflect not just the faces in society but their cultural lived experiences.
Right.
And so I can't take encouragement from the appointment of Priti Patel or Sajid Javid or the new illustrious Minister without Portfolio, James Cleverly, in circumstances where each of them is not bringing any cultural change. They have all been instrumental in the culture which created the hostile environment, the culture which continues to let down those who have survived the Windrush scandal.
Yes.
And Sajid Javid, when he was Home Secretary, and I don't think this will change under Priti Patel, that you won't see
clearly.
from that an addressing of, for example, the consistent racist use of stop and search or death in custody.
But
and so
I'm getting absolutely rinsed today. I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, surely it's a start towards that cultural change to have moved away from a country in which you would not have been in the cabinet because of your skin colour. You could not have been in the cabinet because of your skin colour. Don't forget, Enoch Powell was in the Tory party when he delivered the Rivers of Blood speech. I mean, the idea that the same party now has Priti Patel, James Cleverly, Sajid Javid, Kwasi Kwarteng and others sitting around the cabinet table. Sure, I know that I've done enough exculpation and pointed out my white privilege, but surely surely you and me can use the word progress to describe the Conservative Party of Enoch Powell compared to the Conservative Party of James Cleverly. Surely, no?
I mean, the problem is, James, if that's your reference point, it doesn't really count for very much, does it?
All right, maybe I shouldn't have picked Enoch Powell then. But okay, just all right. Let's look at 30 cabinets.
Go on.
And you go back to who was the first cabinet minister of colour? Do you know?
Not off the top of my head.
No, nor do I. But it was in our lifetime. It was.
Kwarteng in the Labour cabinet.
Could have been. Yeah, could have been. I mean, surely that's just progress, isn't it? Just representation without scrutiny is progress, isn't it? I'm going to struggle to shake this, mate, and yet I sense all of the evidence is stacking up against me.
If progress for the sake of progress helps nobody and achieves nothing, and it goes back to the point I was making at the beginning, if you are somebody who is from an underrepresented community which has suffered the consequences of that in various different ways, the reason that you want change is not just, as Adrian was saying, so that the people above you look like you. It's so that the sorts of injustices that you experience stop happening.
Okay.
And many of those injustices are rooted in cultural attitudes, and I mean that in the broadest possible sense.
So it doesn't matter how many brown or black faces there are sitting around the cabinet table if they are the party of Windrush, the party of more stop and search, and the party of the hostile environment.
Exactly. In the same way that, to take an example from America, lots of police forces in America, I think Ferguson might be one, have lots of black police officers. That hasn't addressed the fatal use of violence that you see there, because the cultural structures and the power structures remain fundamentally unchanged. And in fact, what happens is you have some appointments, so we can take Sajid Javid, Priti Patel, James Cleverly as examples, become celebrated simply for their own sake without bringing any change. And so nothing actually... everything
not just failing to bring change, but actively upholding the current system. and being used as leverage almost. I don't, for the record, think that these people have been promoted so that Boris Johnson can score points.
But in a sense,
that doesn't matter.
In one sense, it doesn't matter, because even if that isn't Boris Johnson's intent, and I'm personally cynical about that, the fact is that people who would push back against any form of equality or progression in relation to diversity will see that and say, but you see, look, it's all right now, because look at the Home Secretary, look at the man who's now in charge of the purse strings, and that just is enough. And
of course, the final point that I may have missed, given that we're building quite a long list of points that I've missed, is that this also allows them to campaign in the coming general election as a party for which people from ethnic minorities can vote. Because look at our cabinet, and don't look at our policies. Oh boy, that was one of the most fascinating hours of radio I've ever been involved in, and I don't think there's any false modesty at all involved in me saying it had very, very little to do with me. So thank you to Michael and to Adrian and to everybody, and to Jill, who kicked things off and has been back in touch to say Michael's just made exactly the point I wanted to.